Hello everyone. We are Group 8 from Section 1, History and Philosophy of Psychology. Today, we are going to present about Neo-Freudians and ego psychology. Neo-Freudians are the people who believed in the basic ideas of Freud. They complied with the central claims of psychoanalysis and yet revised the system. These analysts made changes to the extension of the ego concept. They claimed that the ego had a more extensive role of its own. They stated that the ego was free from the id, and had its own functions parted from the id. According to Freud, the ego is the response to the id, and it will never free from its orders. Neo-Freudians, however, saw that the ego was able to function independently of the id. Another change that they made is that they stress less on biological forces as influences on personality. They focused more on the influence of social and psychological forces. These analysts have also minimized the interest in infantile sexuality and the Oedipus complex, stating that personality development was resolved mainly by psychosocial forces, not psychosexual forces. Social communications in childhood are considered to provide more influences than the actual or imagined sexual interactions. The leader of Neo-Freudians' ego psychology was Anna Freud. She was born on the same date as the birth of psychoanalysis. She was the only child of Freud that followed her father's path and became an analyst. Anna experienced an unhappy childhood and had a crisis of identity for 6 years. Later, she devoted her life to the expansion of psychoanalytic theory. She revised orthodox psychoanalytic theory to expand the role of the ego functioning independently from the id. In The Ego and the Mechanisms of Defense, 1936, she explained the defense mechanisms as they operate to protect the ego from anxiety. Ego psychology became the primary American form of psychoanalysis from the 1940s to the early 1970s. Neo-Freudians aimed to make psychoanalysis an accepted part of scientific psychology. Throughout the process, the analysts nurtured one more reconciliation relationship between psychoanalysis and academic experimental psychology.
My name is ATHIRAH binti MOHAMMAD, metric number 1915582, and I am going to present on the collective unconscious. A key to appreciating Jung's contribution to the field of psychology is knowledge of how Jung conceived of the psyche. The word psyche originally means soul or spirit, but by the turn of 20th century, it referred to mind. In Jungian psychology, one's psyche can be seen as their total personality. Knowledge of the psyche, how it worked, and how one could influence its functioning was the utmost concern for Jung. Broadly speaking, Jung divided the psyche into three main realms, which is consciousness, personal unconscious, and the collective unconscious. Before explaining in more detail about the unconscious realms of the psyche, I will first discuss about consciousness that can be described as one's field of awareness, which consists of those psychic contents that one knows, and Young called this as the ego. Move to personal unconscious. As Young writes, there are certain events of which we have not consciously taken note. They have remained below the threshold of consciousness. They have happened, but they have been absorbed subliminally. These events that have been absorbed subliminally occupy the personal unconscious. The word subliminal translates to below the threshold. So what Young's mean is that there are many events that the ego repress or disregard for various reasons, be it that they are too distressing or simply forgotten or deemed insignificant. It must be stressed that the unconscious realm is not merely a receptacle for forgotten memories. Rather, as we mentioned earlier, the unconscious and conscious realms of the psyche dynamically interact, both playing an integral role in the life of the individual. One way that the personal unconscious influences one's behavior is through the impact of what Young called complex. Young conceived of complex as sub-personality which have the potential to exert powerful control over one's thought, emotion, and behavior. According to Sigmund Freud, he believed that complex largely arose due to childhood traumas experience. However, Young discovered that the root of complex resides in a deep level of the psyche, which he called as the collective unconscious. Young's idea of the collective unconscious was one of his most important contributions to the field of psychology. What Young was proposing is that in addition to form the collective unconscious, the universal element need to associate it with the archetypes. Next, I will discuss about introversion and extraversion. For decades, psychologists have used personality traits to better understand how each individual's personality differs. Young believed that there are two mutually exclusive personality types, which are extroverts and introverts. Pupils who score high levels of extraversion tend to feel more comfortable in social situations. Young believed that extroverts direct their energy outwards themselves to external events and people. This is because they feel a sense of reward by following such social experience. In contrast, the libido of the introverts is generally directed inwards, towards his own solitary and thoughtful activities. They are contemplative, introspective, and tend to have difficulty adjusting to social situations. They also tend not to be interested in the external influence and become immersed in their inner world. The introvert is likely to be less confident when dealing with others, individuals, and situations. Regarding this matter, Young believed that the opposing attitudes reflected the direction of the energy. We cannot simply determine someone as a complete extrovert or introvert, since the dominant attitude at any given time can be controlled by condition.